I would like to call the March 3rd meeting to order. If we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Selectman Flynn, would you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First up, we have the Park and Rec Director and the Public Works Director to hear and consider and authorize the purchasing authority to enter into a proposed contract with Greenway Property Services to provide the field maintenance services specified in bid 2020-42 at Town of Fairfield and Fairfield Public Schools facility locations. Funding for this contract is available in Town and Fairfield Public Schools operating budget accounts. Mr. Carey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is the contract, as you just stated, for all of the field service throughout town, including all the mowing for the town sites and all of the field lining, maintenance for all the athletic fields for the town and the Board of Ed. We went out to bid in November, and it's just taken us some time to check all the references and have meetings with the contractor. It is the largest bid that we have in Public Works for the year, and basically the bid came in lower than we had seen in the past year. The total contractual amount for the town is $506,000, and then the Board of Eds came in at around $300,000. The total contract, I think, is 800 and
Yeah. 828, 281.
Correct. Contract went to the town attorney. He's reviewed it. Everything is fine, and we're just looking to sign the contract. We need to get them started within the next 2 weeks.
Here's the town attorney.
Why is it low? I mean, I'm glad to hear it's lower, but what was?
So the bid is basically itemized. So they just provided lower costs for a lot of the services. It's just wide sweeping bid, and just the itemized costs were lower.
Mr. Carey, how much lower was it than the other bid? And this is a new vendor for the town, correct?
Actually, this vendor has done work for the town before with mowing, but comparatively, the bid was about $300,000 lower than Diamond, who worked for the town in the past.
So this is a new vendor for this work?
So they've done landscaping type of work. They haven't done this wide sweeping bid before. They've had just mowing for us.
And $300,000, the Diamond who you referred to, they were the actual existing vendor who changed names, is that
Correct. That was formerly they were Tarantino.
right? So that's a substantial decrease in cost. I'm not complaining, as Ms. Lefkowitz said, but it's a quarter or more lower. Is it the exact same service that we have been getting?
Yes. So we vetted them. I mean, we've checked all their references. They say they can perform, and they're going to be held to that.
And there's no hidden costs?
Right now, no, but it is an itemized bid. It's hard to do this scope of services on strictly lump sum. There's no way to do it.
Right.
So, because they are entering garbage cans and things like that. So, but we try to contain those costs as much as possible.
And this has been vetted, the Board of Education or the Education
Yes, they did.
Administration?
So again, this bid came back, I believe it was in November, correct? So we've spent that long kind of going over it and making sure, because it is, again, one of the biggest bids we have and service contracts we have for the town. And it faces a lot of scrutiny, too. So if it's not working, we'll have to adjust and make sure. I mean, all of the sports leagues and the Board of Ed, there's a very high standard for the athletic fields. So we have a standing weekly meeting to go over all the work during the season.
Yeah.
So if they're if they're not doing the job, we're going to hear it, and we're going to have to manage this very, very tightly to make sure that they're performing.
Well, I did want to comment on that because I do know there has been, at least from what I've seen and what, others like me have commented to me, there's been a noticeable improvement on the conditions of the fields over the past several years. And I'd hate to see us go backwards on that. I'm not complaining about a lower bid. I just want to make sure we've covered everything. Because
Yep.
to your point, if we haven't, there's going to be a lot of.
It's not an option.
Yeah, right.
But I do think at the same time, while I appreciate the excellent level of the fields, there is also a sensitivity in town
Yep.
to the fields. And so I just want to make sure that there's room in the contract if there's, for materials, I assume that's one of the line items, that if we discover there's like better practices in terms of, I hate to use the word chemicals, but if there's better practices or we find that there are other
So
means.
the town has a consultant that basically consults with the contractor to make sure that the town's agronomic programs are being implemented. And we're going to keep with that practice.
Thank you.
Can I ask the town attorney to come up and answer a few questions on the contract? Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Do we know, and I know this isn't we have purchasing here as well, do we have bonds in place related to this? Have we checked and made sure that they can, that they have legitimate bonds and we don't have an issue with that?
So yes, we have a bid bond for this input. They've submitted a bid for it. And after we complete this process, we'll get with them, make sure.
Have we checked it out to make sure that they've had bonds in the past that are appropriate?
They've been fully vetted, as Brian said, and they have some impressive current clients and past clients and recommendations and that sort of thing. So they're legit.
Yeah,
They're legit.
Are you good with the contract termination clauses, penalty clauses?
I'm good with it all, including the latest revision that Gerald and I went over together, but the answer is yes.
Okay, pretty standard stuff, nothing that we should be concerned about?
Yes, and I have to say that the bid itself, the RFP that goes out, is very comprehensive and covers 90+% of the required terms that are necessary. And the contract, the remainder of the contract is fairly standard.
Great.
Yep.
So you're obviously, you've signed off on the contract as being
I have,
comfortable with it?
yes.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it, Mr. Baldwin.
You're welcome.
Are we all good?
Yep.
All righty. Can I have a motion to accept?
I'll make the motion.
And I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, so. I'm going to ask for a motion to add the following item to the agenda, private executive session regarding legal contingencies.
I'll move to add the following, that item.
And I will second that.
And can I, all in favor?
Aye.
Can I ask for a motion to enter into private executive session?
I move to enter into private executive session.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to ask for a motion to reconvene into public session.
I'll second. I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We took no votes during the executive session, and I am going to, I don't know if I actually need to make a motion, because we're not going to start till 10:30 for the education budget presentation. So do we actually need a motion for that?
Just call a recess.
I'll call recess till 10:30.
All righty.
Thank you. Do you need a space?
Yeah, is that okay? My computer.
So, as many young families do when they're looking for a place to live, The 2020 NEAT survey is likely to be a top hit. NEAT rated the Fairfield Public Schools as the 9th best school district in Connecticut, and we are 3rd on the list of districts with the best teachers. This is good PR for Fairfield. We work to attract new businesses and new property owners to town. As we come to the end of one district improvement plan and begin work on the next, we look forward to engaging the community to make our great school district even better. On behalf of the board, I thank our community for its continued support of education and look forward to this morning's discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our superintendent of schools, Mike Cummings, and district staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vita.
All right, good morning. I'm going to go through the budget presentation. I promise, because I practiced, I won't take as long as I did with the Board of Education. But just to really, because this encompasses the highlights of our budget and the process that went into developing the budget. I think it's important that we go through this, particularly because this is the core document. This document summarizes the core issues around our budget and how we came together. So I won't go through again all these details, but we've been working on this budget for quite some time. We continue to work on it, as some of you can attest. And essentially what I want to emphasize in going through these bullet points with you, to summarize them up, is that we took a fresh approach to the budget this year. I want to make sure that, as the board is well aware, with my being new to this role, but also having carried 4 years of experience into the district, from the district, and with a lot of new staff in central office, we examined a lot of the work that we've done in the past to determine if it was the best thing to go forward. And did our current spending levels need to continue at the level? Should we make adjustments forward or down, up or down, depending on what our past historical information was? So that's a lot of the work and a lot of the time that was spent in meetings together, to look at the requests from staff and to make adjustments. It's important to remember, and I try not to emphasize this point because when you ask people what they want, you're always going to get more than you can absolutely deliver. But we made a lot of changes. For example, we cut almost $1 million out of technology requests prior to even bringing a budget forward. There was good information, good things in there for students and staff, but given what we knew as a constraining number to begin with, we made those cuts early in the budget. It's important to remember, too, that before going into the budget, we reduced the school's allocations by a total of $177,000. So that cut already happened prior to the budget even being developed. As Ms. Vitale mentioned, our primary work right now is on developing the next district improvement plan. As I've mentioned before, that district improvement plan will carry off the current work, but one of the things that we know we can get better at as we move forward is increasing efficiencies within the budget, increasing efficiencies with how we do our work. And one of the things that we're making a commitment to as we bring the new budget plan forward is to include budget estimates tied to each of the goals of that plan. So again, our budget, proposed budget increase in the budget that was voted on and approved by the Board of Education was 3.9%. Most of you are more familiar with this than I am. But this is again our path, and I want to point out again that this column to the far right is really our data point. I know that much of what we talk about is what's happened in the past, and we try to project into the future. But one of the things I want to emphasize throughout this conversation is that there's a commitment here as we move forward to develop a budget that primarily meets the needs of students and the diverse learning needs of students. Now we know since this budget was developed, that top line, that benefits number has changed. When we put the budget together back in this, Ms. Mancella and her staff were putting the budget together in November and December, we were working off a current number from Aon that has since been revised. So we know that that first line the benefits number is being reduced, and we understand that piece. The rest, we maintain our necessary increases in spending. And to point out or to emphasize what I mentioned at the very beginning, at the bottom here, you can also see where we look to make changes in current accounts, current funding levels, in response to the fact that we knew benefits and salary was going to have such a major impact on this budget. So we knew that coming in, and we worked from the very beginning to work towards a more acceptable number. While I'm showing you these wonderfully colorful slides, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that our staff put the presentation together, and I want to highlight the work of Jan Burns, who put all the animations and things like that. As I said to the board, and if this had been mine, it would be black and white. There'd be nothing evolving. It would just
Mine too, Mike.
Yeah. She gets all the credit for the bling. Again, the benefits number will go down, as we know, because we've gotten a revised estimate now on that number. I feel important to mention, because this has come up in several conversations when we talk about benefits. Our benefits increase was driven by two things. One was the number that we were understood that the state rate was going to go up by, based on the provider at the time. The other part of that impact was the change in our base and the premium cost shares that members of our staff were experiencing. Essentially changes in life issues that staff were undergoing. And I've said to many of you before, the issues around singles getting married having children. So that was driving up our base, and while the cut in the overall percent, that cut remains. Those things haven't changed, and that's something that is accounted for going forward. If you have any questions, just stop me.
Can you go back to that
Sure.
last slide for just 1 second?
Sure. That one?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mike, Mr. Superintendent, that is being driven by,
I only asked them to call me that at the house.
exactly. Question. So this increase in salaries is driven by, it's obviously rate and volume. So the volume, meaning that the number of staff are staying roughly consistent, correct? So this is all rate-based increase.
That's correct.
Right. And the increase itself, the increase that you're showing, the 1.62, that's the increase as a percentage of the budget. That's not the actual increase salary compared to salary year over year on a percent basis. It's percent of the budget.
Yeah.
It's percent of the budget, because the increase, what's the increase? How much?
12.5.
No, that's on,
The line item is 12.5.
that's actually the insurance side. That's not the actual salary side, though.
No.
What's the salary side? It's closer to like 3 point something, isn't it?
2.6.
2 point something? Okay. That's not what I'm asking. It's the year-over-year increase in salary expense. 2.6, okay. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have a question?
No, I got what I needed, that's fine.
As Ms. Vitale said, we really are,
Yeah.
as people know, the
There-
quality of our staff is the fundamental difference maker in the Fairfield Public Schools. As great as the leadership is, if it doesn't happen in the classroom, it's not going to happen. And people who come up to me and talk to me about their experiences in the Fairfield Public Schools invariably speak to the benefits that they've had over the years and the quality of the staff that they've interacted with their children.
So if you go back a second,
Sure.
sorry,
That's okay.
which of those contracts is up for negotiation right now? Negotiations on secretaries, I see, and that, but isn't this is the last years of the teachers, correct?
2021 will be the last year of the teacher contract.
Right, so when do negotiations on that start?
This summer, correct?
This summer, so you're putting together your team and all that kind of stuff right now? Thank you.
So again, and you know, one way to look at this slide is the things that translate most into classroom, besides the teachers, the thing that's going to translate most into classroom practice is a 0.28% increase. And I will tell you that while he looks better today, Mr. Mancusi quite honestly went through a lot during this budget process and working on his numbers, and I can't thank him and his staff enough for the work they did, because essentially what we asked them to do was to look at the last 5 years and to base their increases on that historical. And there was decreases in several of their accounts based on that review, which you can speak to in more detail. One of the things that is driving this budget, one of the things that will drive future budgets is, and one of the things that driven past budgets is continuing maintenance issues. As the board is well aware, the town is well aware, we're dealing with an aging infrastructure. We're looking at projects, largely right now, large projects that have to be done, but there's still a great need to increase the day-to-day operations and maintenance of our budget. Mr. Papageorge has taken, again, a fresh approach to a lot of the work that's gone on in the district over the last several years. And the district is also increasing not only its the need to redo or refurbish certain areas, but also increasing its investment in preventive maintenance programs. So while the contract has not yet been settled, and at this point he looked to the board, Selectmen pleadingly, this budget was based on the figure that we had received and what we know to be the bid that we're going to go with.
And just to be clear, we met earlier this week on this. You were kind enough to have me in. This has not been yet presented to the Board of Selectmen. So the RFP has been kind of approved. You know who the vendor is, and the contract, my understanding is now being drafted, correct? And then it'll come before the Board of Selectmen at a soon-to-be-determined date. Is that fair? Okay.
In a couple weeks.
And this number wouldn't change?
This
You're
number
not
wouldn't
coming
change.
back to us?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, this is good. So a little bit more details. The tuition, this is one of the places where Mr. Mancusi worked the numbers down, again, based on what we saw. And part of this is in response to the district's investment in keeping these students in the district and building programs to meet student needs. So that's partly driving that number. Again, capital expenses, supplies, texts, and materials. We took a hard line on some of the wish list items there. And one of the things that we're looking at, quite honestly, is we have to always monitor our desire to achieve certain things with our ability and time to actually do that well. And that really has become the guiding question for anything that we talk about with implementing new programs. Can we do it really well in the time we're allowed? And if we can't, we should not commit to that. More detail on these reductions.
Can we, on the supplies and texts, in the last couple of years, and remind me if I'm wrong, which is quite possible, we've done some swap outs of curriculum that have required additional expense on new materials and textbooks and stuff. Is part of this that's not happening this year? Are we done with some of the swap outs for this year?
It is. We still have, if we pick one curricular area that we still have investment in, still need to make investment in, it would be science.
Yep.
We've, as you well know, we've put off science
Couple
material
times.
acquisition primarily because things have not been available. The horizon really isn't any brighter for that.
When you say things have not been available, what is that?
What we're looking for, the industry
Yeah.
is struggling to, the industry being the publishing industry,
Yeah.
is struggling to use its traditional format to meet the challenges of the new science curriculums.
Okay.
I would say a year out from now, when we're in a 2-year review right now for our math curriculum, this account could well go up because our math, the curriculum itself is going to remain relatively stable. There's not a new set of standards that we need to respond to. What's going to change is pacing, some of the arrangement of units, things
Yeah.
like that. But also, we're 10 years down the road from that initial implementation. If better resources are available, we're going to need to look at that.
And that's part of the ebb and, my point being, that's part of the ebb and flow. Some years you are putting in a new curriculum or updating, as you said, for what's available, and other years you're not.
Other years you're not. I mean, we were revising health, PE, and art this year, but those 3 areas have relatively little impact on curriculum materials.
Right. Science could have a big impact.
Science
And,
could.
yeah.
Most recently, we could highlight certain areas within this. Since I've got the mic, I'm going to just call out again. Ms. Kupchak knows. And in my first year, I want to just shout out to the health department. I keep thinking I'm done with SANS and Jill, but things keep coming up. And just in the last 2 weeks, their contributions, we're daily emailing back and forth, probably 3-4 times a day at least. They're always there, they're always responsive, they give good advice. Our school nurses are right now on the front lines again of dealing with a lot of parent and student and staff concerns.
Yep.
I just can't say enough about their help.
By the way, he did yesterday blame his budget increase completely on you. So,
Well, I take it all back. I'll still shout out to Jill. All right, so let's talk about where we feel we need to put into money, while I'm talking about maintenance here real quickly, Mr. Papa George is home ill with the flu himself. So we'll attempt to answer any questions that come up around his particular budget items, but anything we can't get to you or answer today, we'll record and get back to you as soon as he's back at work.
Are any of those maintenance projects impacted on some of the things that we approved a few weeks ago? I just saw AC.
Right,
Yes. Well, that AC is about the,
Ward.
no, this.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, this is around really about building,
We did the
looking at
cafeteria.
finding a contractor to get some cost estimates to expand it, air conditioning across the district. So these are things outside of what's already been approved.
Okay, and won't impact, we didn't approve, okay.
Won't affect the capital and non-capital projects, so.
So as I mentioned already, I'm gonna go to that fourth one. Science and GSS is our science curriculum, also our STEAM program at the elementary level. We have to do some work to shore up some of the materials in that. But quite honestly, that's the problem of success. The students have so absorbed into that STEAM program, have so responded to it, that they're moving through the materials that we've already acquired so quickly that
Can you
we've
talk
gotta
a
do
little bit
more for
about
them.
that? Can you talk a little bit about that program?
The STEAM program,
I'm just
sure.
interested in it.
So the STEAM program is every K-5 class gets a 45-minute opportunity every 6 days in the rotation, the 6-day elementary rotation. We have teachers who across the district who, for most of them, do both the STEAM lessons and also provide the gifted and talented services to students who are identified for that program. They essentially engage in units of problem solving. One of the things that people mistakenly think about this program is that it's a bunch, it's coding or it's computers, and there's some of that in there. There's some aspects of that, but some of this can be just problem solving and building materials or resources out of cardboard. So it's really about the thinking that's required, not the thing.
Right.
That goes on with it, and then it's a developmental program. So students grow on that from K to 5. This is our first year for K2, our second year for 3-5.
And math curriculum, does that include Math Academy? Where does that fit into?
Math Academy is included in that in a couple different ways. One is the needs of the students identified, or the students being identified for that program. That's required some curriculum hours to be spent. Essentially what we had to do was take the 4th and 5th grade curriculum, the existing curriculum, and the 6th grade curriculum, and take 3 years of curriculum and combine it into 2. So there was curriculum hours spent doing that, and there was some material allocation for that. But the other thing that the math curriculum, the Math Academy has raised for us is questions around the gender equity issues, questions around meeting student needs. So the committee of staff that is currently looking at the math curriculum is using that as a starting place to ask some questions about all of our students.
And where does the Math Academy live? Is it in every elementary school? How does it?
It's only at Holland Hill right now.
And so only the kids at that school?
No, we have a students come from across the district, parents provide their own transportation, and the classroom is housed there, but we have students from, not all the elementary schools, but students from different elementary schools who attend, because it is a parent choice if they decide to attend or not.
And it's after school or
It's during the
during
day.
the?
It's essentially their class. One of the things I think that I want to make clear that I realize probably wasn't clear is when the Math Academy was added, because students were pulled from different sections across town, different classroom sections across town, for the current budget year, it actually had no impact on staffing. There was enough students coming from one school in particular that we were able to close a section in that school and then essentially shift the FTE from that school to Holland Hill to support the academy. So it's had no budget impact other than some money on the curriculum work and some money on some materials. The staffing, if the program didn't exist, we would have used that FTE at the other school.
Mike, can I just follow up on that?
Sure.
I was told, or I was made to understand that it was about 200,000 for the Math Academy. Is that not accurate?
The 200,000 would be accurate if, so let's say go into next year. Well, I think next year it would really only potentially be 100,000 because if we do need to add another FTE. And then we're going to need some materials because essentially we're adding a 5th grade section.
So how much is it this year?
This year, I would say, I'd have to get that exact number to you, but it was really only the curriculum hours and some materials.
And how many students are
It's
utilizing?
only 13 students in there.
13.
Yeah.
And it will cost about 100,000 next year?
If we have to add the FTE, yes.
Okay.
And how many students for next year?
We don't know yet. We'll be identifying students in the next couple of months and then sending out the invitation. One of the things that the Board of Education did when they voted to support this program was that we would maintain essentially the minimum class size that we maintain elsewhere. So if the classroom can't support itself in terms of the number of students, the classroom is going to run. Although I want to be clear, we have a commitment to the students currently in the 4th grade to continue them into 5th grade, because they are now in a different math program, and to pull that out from under them in the middle of this would not be the right thing to do.
And then when they go to middle school, what happens?
In the middle school, they can accelerate, they'll essentially go into the 7th grade.
To the advanced program, the most advanced program.
Were there more kids identified but who couldn't do it for other parent reasons, whether they couldn't get their child there?
Yeah, we had 40 students initially identified.
So I think that 13 number is not necessarily reflective of,
No.
and it likely could.
Well, since everybody keeps talking about it, you really helped the publicity of the program, so I think that you might see an increase.
Well, as a mother who would have really loved to have her child in the Math Academy at a time, I'm just interested, so personally.
It's important to remember, and I want to emphasize this, and this is the conversation we had when we had the parents of those 40 students come in June to talk about the program, that it's not the only way you get into the accelerated 7th grade program.
Right.
There's other ways to do
Right.
it. So this is not the one-all, be-all, but for those students, you can certainly look at the Board of Ed meetings to see the testimony of the kids and the parents around the value they see in the program.
Well, I just want to make one more plug, that
Sure.
if you have a child who's not being engaged where they could be, it leads to all sorts of other issues,
That's right.
which then you're tackling through other things and throwing money at a problem that may be solved by just giving them a little extra math.
That's very true.
Just saying.
The most important thing that the kids and the parents talk about is the environment of like-minded individuals. So, just a couple things that this budget is going to support. These are not big dollars, but I'm not going to waste an opportunity anywhere with a microphone and television to talk about the work, the learning, teaching and learning work of the Fairfield Public Schools, because this is why we're here. So, and I could talk in depth to any of these types of things if you want to, but essentially, our work, globally speaking, is about better meeting the needs of our diverse set of learners. So that's about the SRBI supports that we feel we need to put into place. Our middle schools and high schools are way behind in their efforts to meet the needs of students who are both struggling in class and students who need some other opportunities, some advanced opportunities. We need to do better at that. We are dealing with a capacity issue because I've brought more professional development into the district, and I'm using the program directors, essentially the curriculum leaders in K-5 and 612, to provide more support for teachers. For instance, they're doing a full-scale assessment literacy, assessment training for our high school, middle school staff at this point. We're going to need to, we're looking at restoring the department chair position to our high schools for the 4 major content areas. We have a lot of work to do in literacy training in K1, pre-K. Our phonics program is not strong. It needs to get better. And this is a proactive measure. We truly believe that if we improve the literacy instruction in particularly the primary elementary grades, but certainly through 3-5, we're going to begin to address the number of special education issues that arise when students can't read, and that shows up on the radar in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade.
So will some of that training include identifying kids who may benefit from like an Orton Gillingham program, or understanding how to identify some of
Absolutely.
those potential dyslexia?
And one of the things when we talk about efficiencies, and efficiencies don't necessarily show up here because they're not necessarily captured in the budget, but one of the things I want to talk about is in relation to that 5th bullet, the 5th check mark. One of the things we're doing is we're looking at existing FTEs in the district and thinking about how they might do a different job. So particularly around that idea of Orton Gillingham or Wilson type training, how might we convert existing FTE with general education giving up half of it and special education giving up half of it to create a position that's essentially what we have, just in-district trainer to work with staff rather than have to go outside. Somebody who can help problem solve these most difficult reading cases. Yep.
I know there was a fair amount of, I hesitate to say controversy, but there was a fair amount of discussion over the middle school block scheduling.
Yeah, you can call it a controversy.
Yeah, where does that, well, there was pushback, right, from the teachers themselves. Where does that currently stand, and is there funding for that since it's in this budget? Like, what's going on there?
Yes, our plan is to implement that in the 21-22 school year. We've put money this year. We put some money into it, but primarily we said that this is going to be the professional development planning for the middle schools over the 2021 school year.
So does that mean it is moving forward, that is going to happen, it's just been delayed by a year?
That's right. Our take from talking to our teachers and also from parent input was that it needed more time. And so that's how we responded with more time. We understand that there are more questions needing to be answered. And in fact, in a couple weeks, our middle school teachers are beginning to work on those issues themselves. The feeling was that we had not captured teacher voice enough, so we're taking a step back and doing that going forward.
I'll just say one thing that was missing, I think, from the conversation, anecdotally, I think people who were living it understood, but the kids who are maybe different types of learners, a lot of parents of those students were very nervous that their kid wasn't going to be able to handle it from an attention standpoint, and it's almost contraindicated because it actually can be helpful for those students because of.
That's right.
So I think that would be an important piece to that conversation that I just know anecdotally was missing.
A lot of this comes back, all of our work comes back to instructional planning.
Yeah.
And how do you make sense of an 80-minute block to include movement in it, which is good for all students. The 6th bullet is about, we have a change in state mandate around health FTE, or excuse me, health graduation requirements. So we're going to need another health educator at the high school level to meet the needs of that class. Essentially, the requirement went from 0.5 to 1.0. Our current freshman class is the first group undergoing that. Now the sophomore class will be the next, and obviously every ensuing class will have that. After this year, we'll have the staffing level necessary to meet the needs of all students going forward. And The last bullet, but the most important, is continue to support the work and the fulfillment of the vision of the graduate. That really is the encompassing umbrella for all of our work. I won't go through a lot of this. I'd be glad to talk to you at any point about this, but essentially, and this is not a budget impact issue, but we are changing the organization of central office. This is an older slide, and I apologize. The middle school and high school principals really should be down here with the elementary principals. But essentially, what the two positions that we're creating are more of a traditional structure. We're bifurcating the central work under myself for instruction, curriculum, and assessment, and then the operations and processes role. The operations and processes role is a new role. This really came out of a lot of conversations I've had over the course of my career, but particularly in the last few years with folks in the Fairfield Public Schools, including Mr. Smoller, the president of the FEA. We have a lot of standing practices that have been in place a long time, and a lot of those make sense for different reasons. And to vastly oversimplify this, but we're still doing things on paper that should be moved into electronically and into the cloud. We still have role confusion. We still don't do a really good job of implementing programs to get their full maximum capacity and spend time on them to make sure that staff can fully implement them. We also don't do a very good job sometimes of getting rid of things.
Right.
And helping people lose sight of that and actually take things out of their hands sometimes. So there's a lot of work that can be done to make us a better organization. And to some degree, I describe this position as an ombudsman that really has oversight to work with all departments and to make us better at the work we do. We have just begun to interview for these positions, and we're hoping to have people on staff and ready to go on the 1st of June.
What are the positions?
It's the first one there, the two in the center, Executive Director of Instruction, Curriculum, and Assessment, and then Executive Director of Operations and Process.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I fully support in specifically the operations and processes position. I think you're absolutely right. In every organization that I've gone into, be it private or public, that has added a position such as that has actually seen the benefits and pretty quickly of doing exactly what you're saying, of pushing forward and being involved in the details with the people that are doing the work day to day.
The other thing that we're going to be doing, and this is a .5 position, is, and again, there's no budget impact to any of this, we've changed existing positions, but a .5 position is creating the Director of Public Affairs. This would be a non-certified position, but we feel that one of the things that we have to get much better at is both internal and external communication. So we're going to have somebody to take care of that work.
So you said on this slide, the middle school principals and the high school headmasters would be reporting to the executive director as opposed to direct. I'm worried about your span of control as the superintendent.
I'm worried about that too.
Yeah.
But the way we're looking at this right now is we have to have supervision for all of our other certified administrators.
Yep.
In the bargaining unit, as well as the executive director level. So at this stage in planning, and some of this will be influenced by the actual person who gets hired for each of these two positions.
Yeah.
But I would have the middle school principals and high school headmasters probably still under my evaluation.
So that would mean you would have close to 11 to 12 direct reports?
Yeah, I have about 20 now. So I see.
Yeah, it's a span of control. Yeah, okay.
So what we want to do at the middle school, and this is in preparation both for the new schedule, but also it's an outstanding need, is we want to have an SRBI coordinator for each of our middle schools. So this is a structural issue. If you think about the middle schools, and I'm going to simplify this a bit, think about let's take on Tomlinson. 2 6th grade teams, 2 7th grade teams, 2 8th grade teams. Each of those teams has responsibility for dealing with the learning needs of the students on that team. Each of them there's a 6th grade schedule that runs unique through the building, a 7th grade schedule that runs unique through the building, and an 8th grade schedule that runs unique through the building. What we don't have the ability right now to do is to think about interventions as a building level need rather than a grade level need. So the middle school coordinator would, SRBI coordinator, would have the ability to start to think about how do we resource student supports across grade levels, or, excuse me, first teams and then grade levels. So if, because of reading or math needs, there are students in the 7th grade and 6th grade situation, how do we pull them and put them into a single group rather than try to deal with a 6th grade group and a 7th grade group? This is designed to not only improve the quality of what we're doing for students, but in order to improve the effectiveness and efficiencies of how we get that work done. To approach it from a building level rather than a team level. Currently in our schools, we don't have any position that addresses this. It's really left up to the teams, and none of the existing staff members really have the time to do this. It's sometimes left to the assistant principals in each of the schools, but they're middle school assistant principals. This is not the first thing that they usually are doing each day.
Reading, math, and behavior, I understand. How come writing is never part of these conversations?
It is, and I apologize. I really should, a more inclusive term would be literacy than reading.
Okay.
Particularly in the upper elementary and middle high.
Is it being addressed at the elementary level?
In terms of?
The just writing support, early identifying writing as a kind of red flag.
It is. I would say that I think our writing program in the elementary and middle can get better. I think our writing work can definitely improve.
And what is is that just a question of dollars, or is it getting
It's more
expert?
a question of time.
Okay.
Time and I think for a large part across the district, some of our work is about is developing that pre-K-12 continuum of what this should look like at every grade level so that we know what the learning target is and then teach to it. And if the student isn't reaching it, how do we intervene to teach to it? That's a lot of the work that we're doing. I lied to you, this is taking longer than we could have been. So again, I talked about the high school health teacher, I talked about the high school department chairs, which is a stipended position, and this will be on, this is no reduction in teaching duties. They're gonna have their full teaching duties, and then they'll receive a stipend on top of that. And then we also have to add, and we are remiss that we don't already have this position in place, high school chemical hygiene officers. By law, we're required to do that, and we don't have it.
What is their responsibility?
Essentially, the MDS sheets, anything that comes into the building that winds up in the science department, and to some degree, sometimes it extends beyond the science department, but anything that is potentially hazardous is used in primarily chemistry classes. There's requirements about how it's locked up, how it's stored, how long it's safely kept, sign-out sheets, sign-in sheets. Their role would be oversight of those different functions.
Is there special training involved?
There is training in that. OSHA supplies training for these folks.
So are these essentially your science teachers that are teaching those courses that require those materials, go for special training, and then get a stipend for having to deal with and make sure we're in compliance with the storage?
It would also work with our maintenance so that when things have to be disposed of, they're safely disposed of, and we make sure that that stuff is actually leaving the building.
Does the state come in and test?
The state will do that on occasion. It's not something that the state, I think, is actively doing.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it is, just making sure that things are locked up in the proper cabinets, and those cabinets are the fireproof cabinets and things like that. So our overall FTE change is 0.2. I think it's important to note at the beginning that in our current budget, we are currently operating 2.83 under budgeted amounts. Okay, so we're below we're not spending all the money that we had for budget, and because we're making decisions that that's not necessary. 2.13, I was right. I was right. Non-certified net change is 1.0. So our net change overall is actually down, 0.7, because 0.5 of that 1.2 will be in grants. go through this quickly because you know this.
Can you go back, I have a question about staffing.
Which,
Well, it's more just a question. There's been discussion that you had hired teachers outside of what was budgeted. Is there truth to that? How do you answer that?
There's not truth to it this year. My experience in Fairfield has been that that's had to happen if an elementary section or an elementary grade level increases the staffing that was allocated for it. So this year we have a request for 200 students going for 200 FTE in the elementary level, K-5 to teach. If pick any school, if the enrollment were to increase and there was no proportionate decrease in another, and we exceeded our per pupil, we would have to hire an FTE. Now, we would do that balancing against other needs in the district. I mean, we continue to keep an eye on things. So even as the high school staffing or the high school scheduling takes place over the next month or so, we'll continue to look at that. I mean, the principals have to work within their bounds. But if we're looking at those class sizes and class sizes are getting lean in a certain area, that FTE goes into play for something else. And if we don't need it, we don't need it. That's how we came to a reduction this year of over the two. So that's just something that we have to consider. I will say that Dr. Jones, while she was here, when I first started as director of elementary ed, we would make those staffing decisions at the elementary level in June. Dr. Jones pushed that decision-making back to August. We have a requirement now that all the principals, if a principal is on the border of adding a section, they have to confirm that every single one of the kids that's showing up in the is actually coming back. And until we confirm that, we won't approve the hire. So over the last couple of years, a couple of these changes have gone in place to help keep that number stable and to make it truly responsive to what we have on the students in the seats.
Let me ask a question, just a process question on that. You estimate your staffing needs right now. It goes through the town bodies. The Board of Ed takes your final vote after the budgeted numbers known, the budgeted allocations, right? Which is sometime when, June? End of May. So then you move forward over the summer. You get new information June, July, and August, whatever, and you make your final assessment on staffing needs at the administration level. Am I following so far?
Yes.
What happens then? Does it go back to the Board of Ed to adjust the budget for the additional staff so that the budget now reflects that instead of what had gone through, there's no information and that number gets changed? Or how does it work?
I think we should be, go look to Doreen because I've not been involved with this before. Do we make the changes then?
We don't vote on making the budget adjustments during.
Right here.
Thanks, I'm trying to make you get up.
Okay. I didn't see that one right there. We do not typically make budget adjustments, vote to make budget adjustments mid-year. The board has been apprised of any changes in line items at our quarterly reports. And if we know that we're facing a large reduction in a particular area, it's more of a sense of the body, I think, that Ms. Munsell, the superintendent, will report to the board, make suggestions on what might be moving around. We saw it this year when we had to replace a roof.
Right.
And where we're going to find that funding. But we do not vote. We typically just vote on our budget adjustments at the end of the year.
So then what happens when the budget gets reported out? So for example, we look at the budget book from this time last year and we all have numbers there, right? Which are best estimates right now. And then now I'm looking at the budget book this year. Are we comparing against the original budget that was approved last year? Or are we comparing against that revised budget? Do you see what I'm saying? So when we say, hey, we didn't make any adjustments or we haven't added to staff more than budget, is that because we've already adjusted the budget and it is different than what we had estimated last year? You see what I'm saying?
Once the board makes the adjustments in May, that becomes our approved budget. That's the budget that anything else after that is compared to.
So, okay, so that
Okay, so anything compared is based on the May budget. So if this is the staffing now, and then in May, that gets adjusted for better available information, when you report back next year, it's going to be against whatever that May number was, not whatever number we're looking at today.
Correct.
Okay. Is there a lot of change has there historically been a significant change between what gets approved now and what gets, corded off by the Board of Ed in May, based on better information?
Not always,
But there is some.
but there is some.
Okay. I just want to clarify that because people have asked me that and gone back and looked at prior year budget books and said, hey, this is different than what you're comparing to.
Yeah, because the budget book comes out, and then if reductions are made.
Exactly.
That's not necessarily. This year, Ms. Mansell did update the book. You have to factor in those budget adjustments.
That are all done in May.
And we assume that town officials know, because the Board of Education reports to the Board of Finance, and now we're reporting to the RTM.
But I think-
But in terms of following the paper trail, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, and I don't, when we have our Board of Finance quarterly meetings, which are great, by the way, and Doreen does a lot of work for those, I think those are still reported against the May final budget. So we wouldn't necessarily know during those quarterly meetings, right? Because the first quarterly meeting ends up happening in October, November, right? And it's basically, by that point, you're reporting against whatever was approved in May.
Right.
Right. So it's always against kind of how you slice up the pie at the end of May going forward.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Right.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily.
But it's not the original budget. Right. Yeah.
There's an opportunity to see the differences between May and today, or May and.
In here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I answer your question?
Yes. So it's, in some ways, it's semantics. If you are hiring for some people, because if you're hiring new teachers, it's not outside of the budget. If it happens after, it's just, I think people don't appreciate the nuance and the timing and the reallocating.
Our lives would be a lot easier, particularly in the summer, if the existing workforce stayed static. We have people who leave for a variety of reasons, and we're continually hiring. So I think we hired like 50 people last year. We didn't have 50 new positions. Certified staff. Paras is even higher. So you're right. I think that to some degree it is how it's said, and what implication maybe other people then assume based on that.
That's why the conversation becomes important rather than people making assertions, which is why I'm
Yes.
glad that we're able to do so.
And that's why the budget book is so important, as Ms. Vitale mentioned.
Can I just ask a sort of offbeat question? Where are we with Paris? Have you increased their, when is the last time they received an increase?
In salary?
This July 1st?
The new contract. You're the new, yeah.
I only ask that because when I served on the Board of Ed, our paras seem to be the lowest paid paras in the whole area. Is that still true?
Yes.
That's not good.
The only thing the takeaway that I want to make sure that people get from this slide is the challenges of diversifying instruction when we talk about students. So one of the things that I know is a very fair point to bring up is where enrollment is or will be. I think what we have to keep in mind when we talk about enrollment is who makes up that enrollment. We've had a relatively, our EL population, for example, has stabilized somewhat, and perhaps now will stabilize a little bit more. But for a while there, as you could see, that increased. And these are students, by the way, who are receiving services because of their EL status, not just the number of EL students in the school system. And also, one of the things we have to keep in mind is where the students are, at what level, and each level requires a different service of staff, or a different level of staffing. You think about an elementary student essentially has one teacher plus specialist, but a high school student can have up to 8. So how that kind of functions and where people go is just something that we have to kind of continually keep in mind. At the elementary level, for example, you talk about reducing a classroom section. At the high school, it's never as easy as saying it's a single person. Oftentimes, it's 0.2 of social studies, 0.2 of ELA, 0.2 of math, and how do those things add up?
Why do graduation rate calculations lag so far behind?
Well, we could come up with our own, but we really try to use the state number, and that's turnaround time from the state. Because one of the things that they're doing is they're looking, they in a sense have a broader, they look at not only students in the Fairfield Public Schools, but Fairfield Public Schools students who might be in a different educational institution. And so they have to.
So that's not a total, that's not Ludlow and Ward. That's
alone, right. If they're on our books, I hate to put it that way, but if they're on our books as a student, we're essentially accountable for them no matter where they go to high school.
So I'd be curious to know what's our graduation rate from our 2 public high schools.
Our graduation rate is around 98.5%.
It's a good number.
We're a good school district.
Yes, we
I don't
are.
disagree.
I know the point of this slide is not to focus on the cost implication of outplaced students, but it seems to me that there's an opportunity here, and you alluded to it before, with the work being done to try to keep some of those kids
That's right.
in district. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can, but I think probably Mr. Mancusi can talk about it better.
And sorry if I'm like jumping out of order on this one, but
I need a break.
Hello, my name is Rob Mancusi. I'm the Director of Special Education. We're very lucky in Fairfield that our Board of Education supports our efforts to maintain special education programs for students with disabilities within district when possible. We still obviously place students based on individual needs out of district, but the cost of an out-of-district placement is quite high. For students with social emotional needs, the average cost does not including transportation, is about $72,000 per year. For students with significant global disabilities, we have an average program cost for students with a similar profile of our CLC of about $143,000, and that's just a day program. We have some residential placements which could be double that. So we've spent a lot of time in the past couple of years focusing on maintaining and building in-district programs because we believe students are best educated in their home districts, and we are very aware of the high cost of outplacements.
so it seems to me the opportunity is not necessarily for the $143,000 student, but maybe the 72 in terms of our capabilities, or we?
I think both. We've expanded our complex learner cohort programs in district, and we built some complex learner cohort programs in district for students with significant social and emotional needs. This year we opened up a program at Tomlinson Middle School for middle school students. Last year we opened a program at Riverfield Elementary School for elementary students, their district programs. And then we have our impact program at both high schools and at Walter Fitzgerald campus, which services students with our most significant mental health needs.
And is that available information that what it would cost for the town if we were able to keep some of those?
I actually have a spreadsheet that I prepared that I can pass out to you. There is also another, I think, quite interesting information about special education in Fairfield over a 10-year period. How, although the general enrollment has decreased over time somewhat, special education enrollment increases. Our prevalence rate or our identification rate for students with disabilities in Fairfield is lower than the state, so we're not over-identifying students. I think we're getting better in identifying students, and the types of students that we are seeing and servicing in Fairfield Public Schools is we're serving some students with pretty significant needs.
And again, I would argue that identifying those students helps offset some other costs that may be a ramification of not, or an implication of not identifying them, so.
I would agree.
So as a percentage, our percentage of students classified classified's the wrong word, but having special services as a percentage is going up, correct?
The percentage of students identified, yes, it's going up, but it's going up across the state. Our prevalence rate for this year was 12.9%. The state average for the first time hit 15.0%. Those numbers continue to go higher. We're waiting for the most recent data, but the most recent data that we have from last year is our prevalence rate is 12.9% compared to 15.0% from the state.
And are these the primary?
Those are the primary disability categories.
So you don't have, like, one student isn't necessarily identified here in the ADD category and the dyslexia category, so you're choosing the primary, so.
We only can report a primary disability category.
Just curious, has there something changed as to why? Give me, and I kind of know the answer, but give me the tops of trees views. Are we better at it? Have we changed the definition? Are more people coming forward and asking for special services? What's driving this percentage increase across the board?
I think our ability to evaluate and identify students who are eligible for special education continues to improve. I think with the introduction of the new dyslexia legislation several years ago, that prior to 2015, I believe, dyslexia was not a disability category. So that's where, and we continue to work on our reading evaluation, assessment, and instruction for students with disabilities in Fairfield. Again, I don't think we're over-identifying. I think we're doing much better in identifying.
Not implying you are. On the dyslexia versus the learning disabilities, would anybody with dyslexia previously have been classified as learning disability, and this just?
Yes, absolutely. I can't say with 100% certainty, but yes.
Or just identified as someone with a behavioral issue.
OHI, ADHD, LD.
Those all are in here.
Yeah.
Or not identified.
Or not identified.
And
What-
I have to ask the question about the outplaced student. I know it doesn't necessarily impact this year, but I think for the bigger picture discussions for the years to come, I think this will become important. The cost implications.
We're projecting through the PPT process for next year to have 69 students outplaced through the PPT process. That the Fairfield Public Schools still owns the IEP. We attend all the meetings at the outplaced schools, and we work.
116?
Well, that 116 probably included settlement agreements. Yeah, I'm just talking about PPT placements.
I would assume that we're getting two things here, right? We're getting better at identifying, and we're probably identifying earlier.
Yes.
So on average, when are we identifying versus when we used to identify? Do you know?
That is an excellent question. I do not have an answer for you. I can get back to you. I'd have to look at when students were initially identified. I will get back to you, but I don't have that answer right now.
So, and this, forgive me if this is a stupid question, but is there, so I looked on it like developmental delay or something like that, and I can't find many others in here, but I would assume that specific to that one, and maybe some others, there's instances where somebody is identified, they receive special help?
Developmental delay is for our preschool population.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I got that. But I'm just saying, and then they kind of age out of it.
And prior to age 6, we have to evaluate again, and they have to be determined eligible for one of the other disability categories.
Or they are out of it.
Or they don't qualify, yes.
And does that happen?
It does happen.
I would assume so. People just start later, right?
And people exit special education. We're required every 3 years to reevaluate and redetermine special education eligibility. So we do have students that regularly get exited at some point in time in their educational career.
And is that,
that's our goal?
Is that, I was going to say, is that the goal? And how do we track? How do we track success? Like, what is the metrics to say, wow, this is working?
There's multiple data points that we use to track success. Obviously, mastery of goals and objectives on the IEP, participation and success in general education, with or without accommodations, attendance, overall engagement in school, decrease in behavior episodes if the child had some social emotional needs. And it's a collaborative decision that the planning and placement team makes with families.
Okay.
I think this is a great time to also shout out to how lucky we are to have 3 high schools here in town, and that Walter Fitzgerald is such an incredible asset for this town, because I think it does help for those kids that wouldn't necessarily be outplacement, but for whom the sort of more typical high school experience is not enough.
We consider Walter Fitzgerald a jewel of the district.
I agree. If we do have, I mean, I know maybe it's a little out of context, but do you have an update on how we're doing with that?
Right.
Because I'm really interested.
We all are, yes.
I was a big supporter of Walter Fitzgerald having its own building when I served on the Board of Ed, and I'm sort of near and dear to my heart. So I'm curious.
Update on the facility. I'm taking it. So
Yes.
I'm going to be a little remiss because Mr. Papageorge and I haven't spoken in about 48 hours. Because in all seriousness,
Is it moving? Is that a moving target?
yeah.
That much?
Well, it is because Mr. Papageorge and I speak, I don't know, 3-4 times a day. But one of our daily conversations is how he's progressing with conversations both with the Archdiocese and with other prospects. I will say to you that if you'd asked us this question 10 days ago, we would be less optimistic.
Oh.
Let me put it that way. I think we're feeling pretty good on a couple of fronts for the short term. Long term, we have to take care of the short term, then we'll come back to the long term. But right now, I think we're feeling fairly optimistic on a couple of fronts.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. One thing I wanted to point out on this, and again, you know, I spoke on this slide about the EL population and how that provides some differential to the enrollment issue. The other thing I'd point out, just picking out one category from one of the sheets that Mr. Mancusi prepared, which is the change in over time in the 10-year comparison, the emotional disturbance issue. If you look back, you know, it's almost doubled. And I think to some degree, this happens at all age levels, but very unfortunately, we see this acceleration in the middle and high schools among our students. And, you know, maybe it's the onset of adolescence or whatever might be causing it. But this is a game changer in terms of both investment and dollars, but obviously the toll it takes on not only the students and their families, but also our staff. Mr. Mancusi and I were online last night with Lieutenant Waya addressing one issue in particular with one of our students. It really is a very constant presence in the school district. So this is our projected enrollment for 2021 to the right. One of the things that, and I overuse this example, so I apologize because you'll not only hear it tonight, but you'll hear it as long as hopefully I'm working here, or hopefully I'm working here, which is that one of the things that we always have to keep in mind with enrollment is when you spread this out over 17 sites and 14 grades plus, the differentials, it all depends on where the students are. certainly as we look at more numbers, and if you look at some of our future projected enrollments, or you look certainly into our past, those big changes are going to have greater changes at certain levels. So that, again, it's just constant, and it goes back to that conversation we had about how we monitor enrollment over the course of the summer and make staffing adjustments in response to that. Sorry, elementary, and again, this is more highlights the shift that I talk about, how things change over time. This is our middle. I apologize. I should have just stuck with elementary there a little quicker. So this is elementary over the next 10 years. And then you see and then high. So I'm going to stop here for 1 second, only because, again, I want to point out what I said earlier. Where the changes happen, the change in the level is going to have an impact on the change potentially in the staffing, just because of the different staffing models for different levels. But looking at it as a whole, with these each overlaid upon each other, fascinating, isn't it, how it pops in?
Who did your graphs again? Can they do mine for my budget?
Ann Burns is out for hire, but you need to pay us.
Oh, really?
We're always looking for revenue. We're always looking for revenue.
I'm already paying you.
I think if I said you had to pay us. And so this is it overall. You can see the totals here at the bottom. So our projected 2930 out is almost 9,000, 8,967.
Those are the least reliable numbers that further out.
Further out you go. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But realistically, you're saying somewhat constant with a few hundred either
Yeah.
way.
And again, where those kids wind up. You know, when we see a high school enrollment drop from where we currently are with almost 3,000 students to around 2076, that's clearly going to have an impact on our high school program, not only in terms of staffing, but it may also impact the things we're able to offer. So that's one of the things we're just going to have to be mindful of. Do you want me to stay there?
Yeah, go back, actually.
I'm going to set you up for a question.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
no, go ahead.
Nancy. How is that split up between the two high schools?
It's roughly about equal all the way out.
Okay.
It's roughly about equal. I don't have the exact number with me. I'd have to look at the PowerPoint, the full detail. But I think overall, it's about the same.
Go ahead, Nancy. I'm
I was
sorry.
just going to say, when you have, and here it's slightly changing enrollment, can you talk about why it's important to still maintain the level of support that you're asking for, that we...
Well, in the current budget, request.
Maybe more philosophically, but...
I think that I think in this, thank you. I think there's really a conversation about what's the base, right? And so if you think about it at an elementary school, for example, the base is so dependent on the class. It's obviously the classroom teachers, but the base is the principal, the social worker, the school psychologist, the nurse, the art, the music, the PE, the things that come with a program. So no matter how many sections of each of those grades, you have to provide those services. The special ed, the speech language therapist, the OT, PT. Those are all things that are going to be there to support students in that building. You may have 3 sections of a 5th grade, and you might have 5 in another year, but that's going to kind of ebb and flow. And some of that base I talked about, some of that, you might have to ramp up your social worker staffing for that year, or you might have to bring it back down. But you're not going to lose those essential services. Going back to Mr. Mancusi's point, going back to that EL number, the level of base that we have that's being impacted by our diversity of students is growing. So our core program, our need to meet essential services and differentiate for different types of learners maintains relatively constant. Students may shift from one site to the other, they move up in grades, but that support is going to be there. And then it's where we get questions and requests for more staffing is not in, we need another third grade section over here, not now. We get requests that we had, we've seen an increase in social emotional needs in our 7th grade, and they're taxing our social worker and our school psychologists. Or a student moved into the CLC program and our current staffing level can't effectively manage the students that are in the program plus this new student. So it's in response to these other levels of need that we see that challenge. The classrooms, you can rise and fall with the enrollment. It's the support services that, and to be fair, we're maintaining that support for students who need interventions and need additional supports. But when we truly do our job right, we're going to broaden that definition of who those students are. So it goes back to the Math Academy. Now you're looking at students on the other end, I hate to put it that way, but students who are challenging you at the top end of learning needs, and how do you support that? And if we're doing our job as a school system, we've got to be seeking those kids out as well. Just like looking for the students who are struggling to read in pre-K and intervening really early, students exceeding expectations in math or creative arts or whatever it might be, how do we meet those needs? Did I answer you?
You did.
Here's the high school note.
Okay, thank you. So to answer that question, in 2930, the total enrollment at Fairfield Ward is projected to be 1258, and at Fairfield Ludlow, 1309, which is about, percentage-wise, increase the difference right now.
Right.
Actually, no, excuse me, Ward is, no, that's right, about right. Okay. We can get, this is in the Malone and McBroom presentation.
Sure, thank you.
So what this displays, let's get off of the personnel. I understood what you said on the personnel. What this pretty well displays, though, is from a capacity standpoint, if we put the overall school capacity up there, we're in solid shape from a capacity standpoint, from a physical infrastructure. Enough seats in the school district over the next number of years to house the kids once the current projects are completed.
My question on that is based on current needs. If we play out the numbers that Mr. Mancusi projected, right, for example, the CLCs, I don't know where that's going to go. And
in terms of if you need more classrooms because of people with special needs.
Right, those types of things. It depends on, quite honestly, from a revenue perspective, if the district and town decide to expand pre-K programs to include regular education students as well, finding locations for them. So it's what we decide to do structurally, programmatically. What's that?
That's a bigger decision.
That's a bigger decision.
Right.
But based on where we are, to your point, yes. But that's, again, my only question of the what ifs.
And what we found in the last, I think, 3 reports on enrollments is each of the 3 of them has successfully come down a little bit from its
that is correct
predecessor. And that has to do with kind of what's going on within the state of Connecticut as a whole. And the birth rates have been adjusted down a little bit, but there's also kind of the move-in rates and stuff like that, which.
Consistency ratios are still high, though. There's more kids starting kindergarten than there were.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Brenda, can we take up by vote?
So you have, Ms. Munsell and her staff prepared the placemat for you again. This takes a prominent place on one side of that.
I just want to take.
And then just at a glance, again, with that benefits number changing now based on the new information we've received. Thank you.
Thank you. So I thought you were going to go another, like, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, because I'm trying to coordinate where we had these budget hearings yesterday and today. We break typically around 12:15. Yesterday, we took an hour break, which is the department heads, usually that's what they get with their timing. We were going to do that today, but for 40 minutes only, not for an hour. So I'm trying to determine, we would like to take that at like 12:15. So how you want to work that? If there's more comments, like, is there more presentations, or do you want to just go straight to public comment? I just didn't want to interrupt the public comment, so I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
I can sit down.
You can sit down. Take a load off, Mike. So, okay, well, how about we do that? We'll start with the public comment, and then we'll have board discussion after that, if that works for everyone. And we're going to break, though, at 12:15, and then we'll come back in 40 minutes. So I'm opening it up. You could just step up to the microphone and state your name and provide your comments. Nobody wants to comment?
Okay.
Oh, injury.
Oh, come on.
Rabab Hussain, 579 Judd Street. I hadn't really prepared anything as such, but I'm here. And, I know decisions are made and valid points are always considered. We have the strongest Board of Ed, superintendent. I can't say enough about Director Mancusi over here. I have a son in 7th grade at Fairfield Woods Middle School, and he's typical, and I have a son in 3rd grade who's at the CLC at Osborne Hill School. And I was looking at the spreadsheet and the numbers, and, I know that special ed is a huge component, and, it always worries us as parents how much of a huge component it is, and we're always, we're here trying to, gather votes and trying to vote in the best Board of Ed that we can, and trying to vote in people who are supportive of our kids. And I just want to speak in support of that. But in general, overall, the Math Academy, that was such a brilliant point that you also brought up earlier on. We can't afford cuts. It's difficult for parents. Anytime anything of the sort comes down the line, year after year, it's like, okay, 1 year, yeah, 2nd year, yeah, and then consecutively, like, how many cuts? Where's the line that is getting drawn at some point? I feel like it's a fight every year, and I hope it just doesn't become more and more and more difficult. So it's not just a year to year. I want to almost say and speak to, the number of years that we're seeing coming down the pipeline. I'm going on because no one else is doing a public comment here, so just rambling on. No, but I legitimately want to speak to, our strong school system. We're very proud of it. I'm happy to have both my boys here. They're flourishing, they're thriving, they're doing very well. And as a parent, I sleep better at night knowing they're here in the Fairfield Public School System, and all of you are looking after it and doing a great job of it. So just always to keep that in mind. Every year, same speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to comment that I just would speak on behalf, I think I can safely speak on behalf of the three of us. No one would argue with anything that you said in terms of supporting the excellent school system and the people that serve it and support it.
Hi, I'm Katie Flynn, 204 Grandview Road. I hate public comment. I stepped into the BOE budget role about 3 years ago with no idea how many meetings it would entail, and it's been eye-opening to watch the process, so I have to commend all of you. Your questions were really great, and our staff, I email you all, I love you all. It's amazing the work you do. I have my oldest child is a 2nd grader at North Stratfield, and I have 2 students at the ECC, which has been interesting to watch as well. But my main point is just to be aware of being an innovator in town or maintaining in town. And I just worry, we've watched the per pupil expenditures in Fairfield drop precipitously over the last 20 years. And I just want to make sure that we're investing and not just maintaining. And I think that that's something just to be mindful of. And with that, all.
Thank you. Or Stratfield's my alma mater. It's a good school.
I do have a couple of questions if people, and
No other public comment at all? No Board of Ed members want to come up and comment? You are the public. You live in this town.
Christine Vitale, 254 Vernon Hill Road. I've lived in this town for over 20 years. I am a taxpayer. I have 3 children. My oldest is a graduate of the Fairfield Public Schools, a graduate of Boston College, and gainfully employed. So I will say that they have done, thank you. My middle is a freshman at Northeastern, thriving, very happy. So again, thank you. My youngest is a 7th grader at Roger Ludlow Middle School. He's one of those students that I would say has global delays. He will always be a stat on the special ed sheet that you get. So for measuring success for him is going to, number one, getting on the bus and going to school every day, having a good day, making friends, being involved, playing basketball, and really just putting the pieces in place for him to have a successful life, a happy life, whatever that might look like come 21. So I've said it before, I think that, advocating for him really got me advocating for all children. I ask you to, as a taxpayer, to support the Board of Education budget. I think that it is one of the best things about our town and an asset. And as we talk about building, attracting business to town, I think an educated workforce, it's important. I think people want to work and live in a town that supports education. We're very lucky to have 2 universities here. I'd be curious, Madam First Selectwoman, to find out how many of Sacred Heart and Fairfield University alum actually choose to stay in town. I've run across a lot of them. And just in terms of business owners, another stat, a lot of, in my view, moms, women, business owners in town. I think that quality schools are important to them as well. And I think that I moved here 25 years ago. I grew up in New York, started at the New York-Connecticut border. We talk about taxes. Connecticut is still, I'll take on tri-state New York counties anytime, and started at the line and kind of moved east. And Fairfield, really, it offered what we were all looking for. A commute to New York City, high-quality schools, great recreation opportunities. There was a little slump there for part of the time. I lived close to town when I first moved to town, and it was really getting to be a little bit of a ghost town. I think there were 2 restaurants, believe it or not, just date myself, where you could actually go out to eat. Now we are just the mecca of dining in Fairfield County. And I think that our families that move here have a lot to do with that. A lot of disposable income comes to Fairfield. And I think our schools are part of the reason why. So there is my public comment. As a taxpayer of Fairfield, I'll be happy to answer questions as the chair of the Board of Education later. That's that. Any other Board of Education members would like to come forward as about citizens? Come on over.
Thank you, Kristen.
You always speak so quickly.
I'm from New York.
New Yorker.
Okay.
He gets it.
Jessica Gerber, 25 Shady Hill Road. This is actually, the budget before you will be the first budget in 17 years where I will not have a child in the public school system, and yet I wholeheartedly support it. I would support it even if I was not a Board of Education member. This school district has done a tremendous amount for my family over the years and continues to. My daughter's a senior at Ludlow and has had a fantastic education, and my son is a senior in college. And when he first went to college, he had a lot of people there who had gone to really great, top-notch, very expensive private schools, and he did not have any adjustment problems whatsoever and felt that he really now, looking back, so appreciates the education he received here in Fairfield as a result of all of the wonderful teachers and administrators and different specialists he had over the years who got him to where he is today. And so thank you for that. And I just hope that this budget can not be reduced any further. I think as a board member, I spent a tremendous amount of time looking it over, and I think that there are certainly many more things that could have been in it, and I really thank Mr. Cummings and his staff for being cognizant of the fact that we do, we exist in a town with plenty of people who do not have children in the school system, and we have to, not necessarily get every single thing we want, and this budget definitely does not provide that, but it does provide a wonderful educational experience for the almost 10,000 students in our district, and so I wholeheartedly support it, and I'll be back here in a year supporting it, even though I won't have any kids in the system, and look forward to that too. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Is there anyone else who'd like to? So obviously, I proposed a budget cut or budget reduction in the Board of Education budget. And I just want to make a few comments, if that's okay. Listen, I grew up in this town. I'm a third-generation Fairfielder. I was educated here. I was tutored math in a closet at Fairfield Woods Middle School by Margaret Mary Fitzgerald, because I was really lousy at math. My son went to school here, and I just wrote some comments. So I would not disagree with that we have an excellent public school system. We do. It is the very reason that I became involved in public service, was fighting for educational opportunities for students and fighting for building maintenance. My first year on the RTM, I voted for $260 million worth of school construction because of the lack of maintenance that was sort of the history of our town. In that $260 million, we built a new Burr Street Middle School. We built a new McKinley School, which I advocated with every breath in my body for an entire year to knock down and rebuild. We built a second high school. We built a third middle school, and we renovated Tomlinson Middle School. I then went and served on the Board of Education for 6 years. And let me tell you something, as Board of Education members who are here today, you have to really care about education to serve a 6-year term on the Board of Ed. I supported assistant principals. I supported additional guidance counselors. I supported every single program that came down the pike. Everything. Never said no, because I cared deeply about education, and I chose to serve on the Board of Ed. And now I'm in a different role. I am the leader of a community, a diverse community that has a lot of needs. And I have to look at everything, not just maintaining a quality education, but also making sure that our town is affordable and that we're also making investments in our town government. Let's face it, guys, I know it. Our town government has been starved, literally starved for 20 years to make sure that we supported all the maintenance in our schools and all the education programs. And I think the bills come due for our town to be invested in. We need to make investments in our community. We have so many people in this town who don't have children in the school system, who utilize the services of this town and our departments. And we've just not made the investments to keep up with good services for our community. So it hasn't been easy for me. I don't want to make reductions in the education budget. But I also know that I served 6 years and that I've looked at budgets, and I know there's areas that can be reduced. I've seen it happen. I sat on boards when we got big cuts, and we were able to make changes without touching any programs for students. So I'm not saying I know everything, because I wouldn't, as a first select woman, tell the Board of Ed or the superintendent where to make reductions. That's not my job. I have to do that for the town. But I'm saying that if we don't begin to have this discussion about how we're going to look at making good investments and efficiencies, we just can't stay on this path. If you look at the population, if you just look at 2006 student enrollment was 9,424. Today, it's 9,515. But the budget in 2006 was $119 million. Today, it's over $187 million. We have to figure out a way as a community. I spent over 20 years advocating for education issues. I know the arguments, the people who don't want to support education versus the people who do. I think we need to stop doing that. I think we need to sit down as a community and say, how can we find efficiencies so that we can invest in our kids and make sure they get everything that they need and save money at the same time? Because we're pushing people out. And I have to have a huge tax increase, which I feel is bigger than I would have wanted, because I want to invest in the town. I didn't want to be that first select woman who said, oh, I don't want to do anything. I'm not going to make any investments in the town because I just got to keep taxes really low. I want to make investments in the town. The people of Fairfield asked me to do that. So where do I go, right? Where do I go? So I looked at it, and to me, I thought that this cut or this reduction was something that could be absorbed without hurting students. And I'm willing to have that discussion and dialogue and continue to have it. But I just want us to start working too as we go forward, have more open meetings. And I spoke to Mr. Cummings about this and with the Board of Ed this summer, way ahead of the budget season, so that we can come together and find some efficiency so that we aren't having 3%, 3.5% increases every single year. It's unsustainable. We have to figure out a way to stabilize things. And I'm working hard. I'm going to try to grow our grand list so this isn't hitting our residents. But at the same time, I need help. I need help from the public. I need help from the Board of Ed. I need help from the superintendent. And I need help from the community. I don't want to hurt students. That's not me. That's not my history. I care deeply about doing this job right. And so I thought that this reduction was an appropriate reduction, that our talented people can figure out a way to make reductions without impacting our students. We have amazing administrators, and I am so confident that they're able to do that without hurting any programs for students. And then I want to sit down with the Board of Ed and the superintendent and work this summer on next year's budget so that we can have sustainable growth that does not impact children but does not hurt our community. You all live in neighborhoods. You have seniors who are on fixed incomes. I have them all around me, and these people, honestly, their taxes go up just a little bit, and they can't even afford medicine. So we have to come together as a community and support each other, parents and residents and seniors. So that's my statement. I don't want to have people talking, or yelling at me on social media. I'm here. I'm an open door policy. You want to come see me? Come see me. Call me on the phone. I'll talk to you. I'm open. I want to listen. But I also have a whole town to worry about. And that's a lot of responsibility. And so I will open it up to my colleagues who may want to make some comments.
Thank you for that. It's what it is, and I really believe, because you've been leading in that vein, wanting to have the conversation, wanting to have the open door. And with that, I would love, and maybe you can have some time to think about it, but I would love to hear from the superintendent, because I believe that's your intention, is to make good for the town, and you do have a holistic town to look at, and not just this piece, although a huge, important, tremendous piece. You made the point of not wanting to hurt students, and I'd just be interested to hear from our superintendent how you would respond to that, how a reduction, and it's two issues. I think that there's the reduction from the reassessment of the insurance. There's that number, and I think it's important, maybe you could talk about that. And then there's the maybe operation side, I don't know. So it's a two-part question, maybe.
Right, and just for the public who may not understand, so the proposed reduction is 1.4. 800,000 of that was a savings that we learned about through Aon on the town side. We did some research. It's 600,000, correct, Linda? Correct. I think there was a mistake. It's not 625, it's 600,000. I apologize.
made an error. So $600,000, which is actually the true, I say, number. The 800 is just a calculation change.
Just an estimate.
Right. So it's $600,000 that's being requested on the town side to the education side to make reductions across the board, operating. So you want to speak to that?
So to the specific question, I think in the two parts. The $800,000 estimate, if that number holds, we clearly will be able to work that number. I mean, I think the question that was just raised is, or puts in our mind, is if that's a true number yet or not. I think as we get closer to that and we understand that.
Right, and just to interject, we discussed that on the phone, and I said the town is willing to work with you guys if that number does change before the final budget, without a doubt.
So that would come off essentially, I hate to put, this is the right way to put it, but off the top, and our benefits would decrease. We would absolutely be responsible for lowering our benefits account then in response to that number. The 600,000, I think, is a different issue, and I certainly recognize and appreciate where Ms. Kupchak is coming from, and an appreciation of her service and her dedication to education over the years. I absolutely, in our conversations, I know how sincere that statement is. I think the thing that I can't do now, though, is to say that we can't impact student learning in that $600,000. One of the things that I've watched over the past 4 years in my role as elementary director and then as chief academic officer was a place that was cut when cuts were made was the instructional services account, the textbooks accounts, the materials accounts. And we've made those things work, as I talked about before. And we've done those really in response to, as I said before, what we can do, balancing the needs against what we actually can do and making sure that everything we put forward in a budget was practical. But I worry that at some point, because those cuts have happened over the past few years, and I'm sure happened even before I got here, that razor margin is very thin, or that margin is razor thin. So I worry about that. I know that we already invested time with Mr. Mancusi to really put down that special education budget to make it as realistic and possible going forward. And quite honestly, in the back of our minds, we're worried about that. Did we go too far? So I'm hesitant to go there. I'm hesitant to go further into technology because we've taken from that. I'm hesitant to go into maintenance because we've, over the years, and I recognize where the town has been, but certainly from our parents and staff and our student perspective, we have corresponding needs that, as I said, in our aging buildings that we have to address. So I'm hesitant to go into those areas and say, let's find more. So I think that any cut we make will be probably comprised of smaller things because their big targets really don't exist. And I think that we will look for a cut that will be balanced across the different sections of the school system. But there's just no way I can responsibly say that this won't impact program choices and options for students. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, and it's something we're going to have to play out. But I want to be fair and honest with everybody at the very beginning that that's work we have to do.
And I'm going to ask a follow-up that is not meant as a gotcha. It's really asking for the opportunity it's giving you the opportunity to respond. You said something in your presentation remarks that you haven't been great at getting rid of certain things. And I want you to talk about that, because what kinds of things are you referring to? And is there an opportunity here to maybe look, and I'm not, again, trying to... Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question, because it's a great... it's an opportunity to clarify. By that, I really mean, I don't mean the things like programmatic things that the district has done. I think the district has gotten rid of things. I think that in the classrooms and in the schools, those things aren't necessarily gotten rid of, or we've not made clear to things. So what I really meant by that was that teachers might be trying to teach to 2 or 3 different spelling or reading programs. Not that they necessarily have all the textbooks, but there's confusion around the methodology or strategy to use. It's not that I feel, well, let me put it this way. I feel the district has been very responsive in jettisoning things that don't work. It's just how that penetrates into the classroom level I have questions about. Does that answer that?
It does.
Yep.
It does.
Okay.
Do you have any more?
I'm just going to boot because this is the Board of Education budget, and just a reminder in terms of where the cuts are ultimately the decision. The superintendent will make recommendations to the Board of Education, but ultimately is the 9 members of the board who will be deciding where the cuts come. Of course, we are going to be looking. We don't want to, our budget and our focus starts with the student and we work our way out. So when it comes down to having to make reductions, we're going to start at the farthest way out, and of course take the recommendations of staff. And I have just putting it out there as a reminder because certain board members may have a different idea of where reductions might come. Ms. Kupchak, I have to push back a little bit. There was a turning point in Board of Education budgets. When you were on the Board of Education, you had the luxury of having, I think the average was 7% of an average increase to Board of Education budgets during that time period. So while maybe the budgets that you were looking at, there was areas that you could cut, you felt that you could cut, or you could see a reduction not having an impact, I think that when you're looking at the past 10 years or so, when you're looking at a 2.4% average increase, it's a different budget that maybe you were looking at than what past boards have been looking at, just to kind of even the playing field a little bit. And in terms of maintenance, thank you for your support of our schools and for the infrastructure projects that you supported in terms of new school buildings, but that is somewhat of a separate issue than the day-to-day maintenance of just maintaining buildings that are 50, 60, 100 years old. And I think that if you walk through your schools in terms of how old are the sinks, when was the last time it was painted, how old is that floor, ceiling tiles, and as a taxpayer, I appreciate that you are looking at the same issues in our town buildings. And I think that as a taxpayer and as a member of the Board of Education, I don't think it should be, we did this for the schools and now we didn't do this for the town. I'm hoping that it's a new era and that moving forward, that it's not an either or and that we're not putting each other against each other. Because having a town that a strong town government that attracts business is ultimately good for the school district. Having a strong school district is ultimately good for the town. And we've wasted a lot of time being at cross purposes with each other. I take you for your word in terms of wanting to collaborate. You have my word, and I think of the superintendent's word, that we're really open to having the discussion. But ultimately, you have a larger constituency maybe that you're focused on. The Board of Education has a distinct mission that we're responsible for meeting. So there's going to be some pushback. So I'm going to ask that you please approve the budget as presented to you by the Board of Education. Thank you.
And I appreciate that, Christine. And, as you know, I served as chairman of the facilities, the first only facilities committee that put together the waterfall chart for our school system. And we did a tremendous amount of investment in our school buildings, tremendous. What I'm saying is our town has made zero investment, zero, for a very long time. And so that's my challenge as a leader of the entire town, everybody, those who like me and those who don't. So just wanted to clarify.
Are you done, Nancy?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. First of all, Madam First Selectwoman, I thought your commentary was excellent, and I'm not saying that as a. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was well said, and of course, your reputation on education is well known for many years. Couple things. There was a comment made about per pupil expenditures, and I think maybe it was just the phrase was wrong. Actual per pupil expenditures have gone up dramatically over the number of years. Not as dramatically
not as dramatically as compared to other towns, but the actual, right, and you meant comparatively. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I just didn't want somebody who's listening to get the wrong impression on that. Mrs. Kupchak had actually indicated during her remarks about looking at the town as a whole, and my background is obviously well known. I think, at least by this group and by members of the Board of Education that are here, related to looking at the town as a whole. And she also mentioned that the town needs on the town side. Now, we have, in fact, put hundreds of millions of dollars, rightfully so, into our schools over the last 20 years. And in fact, Mrs. Vitale, you had just said something which I think is accurate, but incomplete on the 7%. During maybe Mrs. Kupchak's time on the board. I didn't go back and do the exact lineup.
It was probably less.
Yeah, I think it was, but the 7%.
Pretty good. Let me tell you.
Yeah, but the 7% during that time was actually when we were opening the new high schools, and we were expanding the schools, and the enrollment was actually growing at dramatic increase from about 8,000 to about 10,000. So your point, valid, but not completely analogous, because the other drivers were actually changing as well at the same time. When I look across the town as a whole, and as has been said, we have to look at all the constituencies, there's a few things that really bother me, concern me. And I've been, during the last election cycle, I was told I wagged my finger. Somebody said that, but I'm not trying to wag my finger. I thought that was kind of unique and funny. Same person picked on me for having a bad back, but I digress. State funding is an unknown situation going forward. The requirements for special ed continue to go up. I really appreciated the superintendent's comments on how we might be, in fact, underserving our students that have greater upside potential because of the squeeze on some of these items. The town needs have been spoken about. And then there's this little thing that's coming up in the next 12 months called revaluation. And that could be a game changer, because we have certain areas of town that have been the tent posts, right, holding up the town from a evaluation standpoint, and therefore carrying a greater amount of the tax burden. And those tent posts are under severe threat, particularly when you look at Greenfield Hill and the valuations of those those properties. And when those go down, everybody else's taxes rise dramatically. So next year, you could see a 2.5% spending increase, but you could see people's taxes going up 10, 12, 15, 20%, depending on what their valuation of their property is as compared to the town as a whole. And that could actually force more people out of town and apply more pressure to kind of the middle class, middle income, and fixed income. And all those things need to be taken into consideration. I sound like a broken record because I've been talking about this for a long time, because I've been monitoring this for a long time. That valuation is upon us this year, and that's going to be and could be a significant concern. I would ask, I agree with the getting together over the summer and all that. And a few years ago, under different leadership of the Board of Education, I had asked that they undertake a study on structural change. And that doesn't mean, don't read into that, closing buildings, all that kind of stuff, but truly taking a holistic look at how we deliver programs and what programs we deliver, and implementing best practices from an efficiency standpoint to deliver those programs. A few years ago, there was an operational audit done. It's been a number of years now. Maybe we want to revisit that and refresh that so that we don't have these concerns on an annual basis, but rather we work collaboratively as town bodies to continue to invest in education. But to make sure we're doing it in lockstep, because the growth rates, whether by us or somebody, it's becoming, not just in your budget, but overall, it's becoming unsustainable. And we're seeing that in the state as a whole. We're seeing that in the valuations of homes. We're going to see that in the revaluation that comes up in the next few months. And I think we're very committed to education. We're very committed to those programs. The Board of Education and your administration, I think, are to be commended for all their work and effort and dedication to the children. I take one issue with one of the comments earlier. They said we had the third best teaching staff in the state. I defy anybody to say that we don't have probably the best teaching staff in the state, and I don't say that. I say that with 3 kids that have gone through the public schools. We need to think longer term, and we need to stop having the conversations of where we're going to cut on an annual basis. And we need to plan and say, what are we going to phase out? What are we going to change? What are we going to do differently? How are we going to work together? Because we just, as Mrs. Kupchak said, the bills come due in certain areas. So that's what I would say. And I thank you for all the time, Ms. Manzel. I thank you so much for all the time. It's not easy putting together a budget of this size. So thank you once again to you and your team.
I have a couple questions still, okay. I also want to echo Mr. Flynn's sentiment. I thought you made an excellent, and I'm going to say it again, I thought you made an excellent statement. But I 3 years ago, when I was serving on the RTM, voted to support teacher contracts, and I see so much of this pie is that. And my question goes back to, because it is that balance of satisfying what our first selectwoman has to accomplish, but also understanding that we do need to be in a growth mindset, and that as we grow the grand list and we look to the future, so too should we be investing in education. My question goes back to, since so much of this pie is salaries and staff, and you talked about those cuts, since there aren't big nuggets really to choose from, what are the kinds, can you get a little more specific in the kinds of programs that you're talking about? Like, what are these little, because I don't think people have an appreciation of where those, not low-hanging fruit, but some of the kinds of things that you are talking about. Like, what's really not at stake, that sounds, but what are some of those things? And I get that this is a process, that it's the Board of Education. That's why I'd like to understand what kinds of things what that conversation would look like at the Board of Ed level.
Oh, well, so I would look at it this way. I think what we would do is the kind of process-wise first. This would be a conversation that would take place with the administration in town, the administrators at all the building levels. I think one of the things that we're always looking at is what brings the value. Let me take a step back. What is our core program? What are we actually committed to doing? And that's really guided by the mission of the public schools and the vision of the graduate work. And then how do each of the components of what we currently do add value to that? So that would be an administrator, district, what we call the district leadership team, which is every administrator in the district, and then filtering that back up through the executive directors, the folks who are here today, to bring forward to the board a list that would equal whatever that expected cut is at the time. There are certain things that could potentially change in between now and then anyway, that we'd have to certainly play into this, right? We will be continually running enrollment numbers. We just started kindergarten enrollment, for example. So if that number is higher than we anticipate, we're going to have to think about an increase in FTE. But if it's lower than that, we may be able to say, and it would depend on how low it is, we might be able to think about, we might not need an elementary kindergarten section at one of the schools. So there's 3 months, right? Am I doing the math? 2 months really ahead of us in terms of changing ground. And then bringing forth to the board, because ultimately it's their program that they put forward and defend as the Board of Education, that they run on and support. I would think that if we're looking at some of the issues that might come up, and I always hesitate to do this, because what I want to be is, I want to be totally transparent in the work we do, and I never want to be accused of, like, you're trying just to do this to get people upset, or you're trying, because you've asked me a question, I'm going to give you an honest answer.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we'd have to look at is potentially some of our elementary world language program. How we do that, how that would impact, I don't know offhand. I mean, it's a 30-minute lesson twice a week, roughly every 6 days. I'd be hesitant to take it away from students currently in it. So what would that look like if we took it away from, say, the 3rd grade? And please keep in mind that as I'm saying this, I'm looking at Board of Ed members looking back at me.
Like, stop.
Like, no way. But,
And the reason
I was asked for ideas.
It's not to put you on the spot, it's
Yeah.
really for people to understand what it is that we're talking about, because it's complicated. So we sit here, and I really do understand from both perspectives, so I'm really trying to.
Yes, we will look at, look at high school course requests. We'll take a look at high school course requests to see if that has a possible impact, and can we reduce FTE in any of the departments. And as I said before, that's a question of pieces. High school staffing is a question of pieces, a 0.2, a 0.3 here and there. It's rarely ever a single full-time position in a department gets eliminated, right? But do we find enough that we can take a position at each of the high schools? Those are things we'd have to look at. $600,000 is 6 or 7 staff members, certified staff members. It's 20 non-certified staff, maybe a little bit less, if we put it in terms of people. The maintenance programs or the maintenance projects that have been adopted by the board in their current budget, I think there's a full commitment to, we have to do that work. We may, a couple years ago, we had a lot of money put aside for science textbooks. Those science textbooks never materialized. That was a $400,000 cut we were able to make because we didn't have the textbooks. But we don't have anything big like that this year. So I'm sorry I'm not being as specific as you probably need, but I think that
I think also your difficulty in answering highlights.
Yeah, it's
I'm asking
it's
anyway.
not my decision to bring the ideas forward, nor is it clearly my decision to make those ultimate cuts.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. You good?
Yeah.
Do you have any additional comments?
No comments.
Okay. So, is there anyone else from the public who would like to comment? We're voting on the budget next Monday. There will not be public comment during that. It's just a vote. And then it goes to the Board of Finance, as you all know, for like a year of meetings. It's incredible. So there's that. And then it goes to the RTM, and we round out in May. So I think we're finished. Okay. No
Yeah.
additional comments, Nancy?
None.
Well, I thank everyone for being here. Please, again, my door's open. Call me, email me, come see me. I'm right upstairs. And I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone in this room and anyone who's watching. I want to listen and learn, but I also want people to hear me as well. So, Miss Carpenter? Oh, you're just sitting there? I thought you were getting ready to spring into public comment. Okay. All right, so we're going to adjourn. We're not going to adjourn because we have other things to work on, but we're going to take a break and then come back and work on some of the other items we weren't able to finish up on yesterday.
So, you need us? Done with us?
No, we're done.
Can I just make
You want to make another comment? Of course.
Just want to thank you for the dialogue today and look forward to the start.
Thank you.
And please, the Board of Education budget page, all of the board's questions and answers are on that page. There's a lot of backup there. I encourage members of the board, members of the public that might be watching to check it out, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Christine, where is that in the budget book, if you wouldn't mind?
It's not in the budget, it's on the Board of Education. If you go to on the website, there's a budget page, and all the backup materials from our budget discussions are there. And of course, if you have any questions, email me or the superintendent.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We're coming back into session, and we are going to take up, do we need, no, we don't need an item for this. Do we need a motion for this?
No.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
We need a motion, I need a motion to hear and consider the OPEB and retiree benefits.
Why? Because this wasn't part of the original agenda?
Not for today.
I'll make the motion.
All right, and I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And so we have this item before us, and Linda?
Tom, and the select women, would you like me to walk you through this?
Yes.
Okay, so if you
Where
go
are
to
we?
page 270 in the budget book.
Yeah.
These are our retiree benefits. OPEB is the health care for the retirees, and the retirement contributions are the pension benefit for the retirees. And Tom, you were concerned about pension?
Well, I'm not concerned, but,
Is that what
yeah,
you'd like
they-
to address first, or primarily?
well, if I might, can we, what I would like to do is get the full report that Hooker and Holcomb typically provides reports on each of these, that are bound reports. I'd like to grab those reports if I could. They have graphs and show what the trend lines are in funding over the last number of years. They typically provide them for our Board of Finance meeting, but I was under the understanding they were prepared well before that. So if you could follow up with them and see if they have the reports that they've provided in the past.
Well, I think online is the pension valuation as of July 1st, 2018. They prepare the valuation every 2 years. The next one is due July 1st.
But we usually at the Board of Finance meeting get 2 handouts
Right.
that are, and those aren't in here.
They are in here. The single
graphs?
page, the single page are, right. They don't redo.
Yes, they do
don't
every
redo the
year.
okay. Well,
And its pension is every year, OPEB's every 2.
No, but they do the graphs in terms of what does the funding do for both pension and OPEB every year. They have graphs that show, here's what the funding, here's the percentage that it's funded, here's what it looks like over the past number of years. It's just the normal reports that they provide us every year when we go through it when we went through it at the Board of Finance.
we'll ask.
They provide it for the Board of Finance, not for us, though.
Great, I'm asking for
But
it.
it's in language, though.
What do you mean it's in language?
What do you need
Yeah,
to
I
graph
don't-
if it's
yeah.
in language?
I don't know if they've done it yet. We'll ask them for it to make sure it's available during the Board of Finance meetings.
Can I just ask a more macro question about general? So basically, this amount is determined, we work with this outside company, that these rates are set, there's not much really we can do about this. The pension board is who sort of figures out some of these.
These are the actuaries, and this is based on the assumptions that the town has adopted.
Which goes
And
through.
those will be available in the reports that Tom has.
But leading to this moment, what this number has gone through is already our board, our pension board, and our Board of Finance, presumably, when that has been presented. Have they ever been in front of the Board of Selectmen prior to, I mean, I'm just curious if it's been through.
Yes,
They have from time to time.
typically, up until last year.
The reason I ask is there isn't much now, this is not a flexible, this number isn't changing on the budget, so, okay, so I don't have it.
That's actually not true.
I was just going to say, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, that's not true.
Right.
And a couple things on this. Number one, up until 2 years ago, the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen met together. So this every year was, in fact, before the Board of Selectmen as well as the Board of Finance. And it's a presentation by Hooker and Holcomb. The numbers are their recommendations, but within those recommendations are assumptions, and then it basically says whether they funded and what percentage they funded
Okay.
to. The Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen a number of years ago adopted a policy as it relates, and it was an annual thing that we would look at, adopts a policy that we would do no harm or we would go no less than what we did the prior year. So there were in some instances, not necessarily with OPEB, but with the pension contribution, where their actually calculation would say we could actually put in less in the current year than we did the prior year because there was a higher return on our investment, or there was a change in the assumptions or what have you. And what the board did was we adjusted it so that we went the same with the previous
Which is the
year
90%?
as opposed to the less than.
Okay.
Okay, and the reason we did that was because years before, when it was assumed, and this was before the Madoff scandal, when all the projections said, especially on the pension side, that we were overfunded, the town took a holiday for about 10 years and put nothing towards pension. Madoff hit, all the valuations came down, and we realized we were underwater, and we weren't funded to the level that we thought we were. Had the town continued to at least put some money in during that period, we would have been in a better position, right? So the do no harm clause was we wouldn't fund it at any less than. So for example, and it's a good thing this year, on page 272, you look and you say as of 2019 to 2020 in OPEB, we had put in, and I'm assuming this is the right number, 9,409,000, and this year they're recommending we put in 9,659,000.
Correct.
Right? Now, what I don't know from this analysis is, when I look at the top, I see that the liability says we're 31% funded on the OPEB. I don't know, 31.3, I don't know how that compares to what our funding level was last year, whether that's status quo or whether we're increasing the funding percentage, because that's what we tried to do with OPEB. So those are the type of questions that it answers.
That we will have the documents and the actuaries there as well.
Right.
Okay, so if you, well, let's talk about OPEB since we're here. You'll see on the budget request, we've asked for general fund funding for OPEB town retirees of $4,046,000. How did we get there? The total OPEB request for town employees can be found on page 272. And Tom just referred to it. It's actually the very last line. It says total ADAC 2021, and it's under the town column, the $4,375,000. What happens is, if you flip back to page 271, we take that $4,375,000 and we allocate it among our employees, which happen to live in two different funds, the general fund and the water pollution control fund. That's why you don't see a one-for-one request on the town side. If you go to the water pollution control piece, you will see that their number for OPEB matches the 328,125. Okay?
Yep.
Now, of course, police and fire, there are no police and fire and water pollution control, so we take that total cost on the general fund side. And the second line on your budget request confirms that. You know, I just realized when we're flipping pages, I probably should have these as open pages together. Next year, we'll do that. I'll leave instructions. You will? I'll leave good instructions.
So if you look, right, to that point, you can tie from 272 to 271, you can tie the 9,409,000, which is last year's contribution, to, and then you can tie the 9,659. So you can see that we increased the funding by $250,000 to this, which tells you that under the fund at least as much as last year, we've hit that objective.
Right. Now, the pension in this book, in the First Selectmen's proposed book, has been done similarly, but less than 15 minutes ago, we just got a call from the actuaries saying that the actuarial numbers for pension have been tweaked, revised, updated. This is the normal update that you're in part talking about, Tom, that you expect the Board of Finance to receive.
Right.
However, you're receiving it today because you happen to be meeting today.
On the pro side or the?
Negative.
That little negative. So I'd like to hand out the revised. And I have two columns. I have the First Selectmen's request and the 10-minute ago request.
Okay.
And the incremental change.
Okay.
Thanks, Lynn.
So we are going to ask the Board of Selectmen to vote the change if you wish, or you could leave it for the Board of Finance to vote. Jackie, sorry,
So they've increased the expense.
Yep.
They've actually increased the expense, right.
By almost,
79,000.
well, no, plus the two columns, 97 and then 185.
Right. It's net of that, right.
Yep.
It's
Yeah, so it's
negative
this-
7, and, right.
It's, the 79 is the net differential.
Right, 80, almost 80.
Right, it's,
yeah.
yes, because the 7,940 good piece goes to water
Right.
pollution control, so.
Right. And what's this based on? What changed?
If you look, you will see I highlighted in pink the new numbers versus the one in your budget book on page 274. So the attached sheet where I've highlighted the actuarial defined employer contribution as opposed to the last line in your budget book.
So then this becomes either an amendment that we make to accept the changes?
Yes.
Okay,
And
on Monday.
Right. And
Okay.
if you recall, I said I'll give you, or Brenda, or whoever wishes to.
But what caused the change?
Caitlin, what did he say? We were on the phone call, we were rushing to get the numbers. What did?
I don't think he said that was a placeholder for the original number.
Yeah.
So I can go back and ask him.
I think he said this was actuals. He said that they had a very good estimate, but they trued it up. This might be the actual. And I think every March we do receive kind of this little bit of a movement.
Okay.
Failing anything else. So are there any questions on this part?
Not for me.
Okay.
Yeah, and see, what I'm looking at,
Yeah.
that I'm most interested in, is if you go, I'm referring to the new handout you just handed
Yeah,
out.
sure thing.
Down at the very bottom where it talks about the funded ratio.
Exactly.
Yeah, those funded ratios, I'd love to see what those funded ratios are presently versus what they're recommending, you see what I'm saying?
Sure. I have those, I'm sure. Let me see. Oh, I think I have. No, Tom, I will get those to you.
That's not a problem.
Yeah.
And again, that's what should be in that presentation they put together.
Right, it will be, yeah. So we'll
Goal
get
is
those.
that, the hope is that these three numbers are not going down, but
But up.
rather going up.
Right.
And those were the numbers when they started taking the holiday from funding this years ago.
Was that 10 years ago?
Yeah, it was longer.
2008.
They were closer to 100%, right? And I'm not going to say it was all Madoff that drove it down. Madoff helped, but us not funding it for about 8 to 10 years as a town, not putting any money in, this came down. We've typically would like to see this above the 90% marker. So I want to see what
The trend is?
what the contribution and what the trend is. And those are really the two things we looked at, what the trend was, and then that we weren't funding it at any less than the prior year. And that way, we helped smooth the funding as well, so you weren't dealing with large increases over a period of time.
But we've been funding it every year for the last 10 years, correct?
I don't know the exact number of years, but for the last many years, yes, we've been funding it. Whether it's 8 years or 10 years or what have you, we've been funding it at the ARC or above the
Yeah,
ARC.
it used to be
depending
called
on the-
ARC, it's now called ADAC, yeah.
Right. Same thing.
It is, yeah.
The other thing that's happened in that time period is the assumptions have been tweaked. The rate of return has been tweaked, the mortality rates have been tweaked, so that we could get a finer balance, because what a lot of municipalities and the state was doing was using a much higher rate of return that inflated where you were on funding versus where you actually were, right? So they were giving a false sense of security that we were funding the pensions and everything else at a very robust rate, and we actually weren't. And one of the things that Fairfield elected to do about 8 to 10 years ago was starting to put money into OPEB, which a lot of municipalities still don't do, and which we're funding at an appropriate level.
And just to be fair, Fairfield is very well funded relative to other towns.
Correct.
Right.
Whether we're 88 or 89 or
Right.
90 or 87, we're ahead of many, many, many towns. So
Right.
It's very well funded.
So it's speaking, that's in line with what Matt said at the Board of Finance meeting last week when I was with him.
Right, exactly right. So again, I think.
That we're doing great.
What I would point out, and past administrations have done this, where we get numbers from Hooker and Holcomb, and maybe they'll skinny them down a little bit, or we don't need to fund it fully. We're taking their numbers directly, whatever they say, we're putting in. Doesn't answer your question about what the level is relative to other years, but we haven't monkeyed with the numbers. Whatever they give us, we put in.
Right.
Okay.
But we still get that analysis. Yeah.
I just want to mention one other thing. The defined benefit program is closed. In other words, new employees can't join this pension program.
Right.
Which we're talking about funding.
Correct.
And I think in 2013 was the last year that they accepted employees into the program. So you are going to see on your budget request page a line 52312 for 401A contributions. You're going to see that increase marginally, but that takes into consideration the covered payroll of current individuals, increase at the COLA, and any new employees you are contemplating adding to. So that's why you see that increase go from 415 to 483. I put an estimate in for your new employees. I just want you to be aware that that's covered.
Right.
And that's the
Thank you,
entire
Linda.
show.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, we'll get you the documents. Anything
Appreciate
else?
that. I don't on that. I don't know if my colleagues.
Nope.
Okay, what else? Where are we heading next?
I thought that was the only follow-up for this. Did there was anything
That was it. That's it.
Could we have private bus transportation, just because it's listed on here on the agenda?
Actually, we did not cover that with the Board of Ed this morning, but it's numbers that they supply. So why don't we just go over it so that we know it's
Yeah.
covered? And I'm going to tell you what page it's on. Okay, page 139. This is a document we received directly from Doreen Munsell. And it proposes the public school bus transportation.
What page is this?
139. But I will tell you, if you look at the next page, the first select woman cut this 36,000 based on a communication from Doreen that their estimate was a little high, and they were able to reduce it once they got firmer numbers on that bus contract that rolled in. So this reflects their need fully for private school bus transportation. I will mention one thing. Because this serves the private schools, we do not report this number in the in-kind services to the state, because the state is only interested in those costs that we expend on behalf of public schools, not private schools. All right, and if you go to the next page, 141, Health and Welfare Services. This is the school, well, it's the psychologist, social worker for the
Private school
private
students.
schools. Same story, I'll repeat myself. And this is 140,630, and there is no, that estimate is a good estimate, so there's no adjustment there.
I will, just for the record, Mr. Bremer and I did go over and meet with the superintendent and his team that handles transportation. I think I mentioned this earlier today, and this seems in line with the numbers that they showed us in that discussion, and they will be forwarding the contract supporting all these numbers later this month to this board for review.
Mhm.
And I think they're working with the town attorney first.
Yep.
Very good.
That's it?
That is it.
So, Madam First Selectwoman, if I can have a second before we wrap here, just to address something that's, I think, near and dear to all our hearts, and I don't want to speak for all of us, but I think this board, based on, comments and all that, we've been very focused on economic development, growing revenues.
Is your microphone on?
And growing revenues. But I think we also have a fair degree of concern, as expressed by many of our citizens groups, with some of the developments now and the affordable housing issues that are racking the town relative to a couple of different locations that, whether it be High Street or the other name of the town, the other name of the street, to Brenda?
Beacon View.
Beacon View, thank you. I thought it was Beacon. As well as what's going on with Newport Academy, and we're watching all those closely. We are concerned about overdevelopment. We spoke a lot about smart development and keeping in line with the character of the town and the quality of life for the town. So I know in this particular thing, I'll speak for myself, that I am opposed to those. I hope we work appropriately to get the right type of development for the town. I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I do know that it's an area of concern that our entire board is watching. And I just wanted to say that because I think sometimes we talk about economic development, and I think what we don't mention is the fact that we want economic development that's consistent with the character and the quality of life of the town. And I don't want anybody to misread that.
So, thank you. As the first select woman of the town, I'm actively engaged in this now. I wished our town had been more engaged in it for the last 10 years regarding building up our affordable housing counts so that we would be able to achieve a moratorium and not be subjected to predatory developers, but we have not done that. Everything we have in the pipeline right now that is proposed or either going through the process would qualify us for a moratorium. But they have to have COs, and they have to be done, and they're not done. So this is probably what I would consider a feeding frenzy at this point. This is probably the ripe time for developers to get their applications in as soon as possible, because before we do reach a moratorium. That makes sense. If I were a developer, that's what I would be doing. Yes, I like the town to have more input in what's going to be built in our town. Obviously, I'm working with developers in town on some of our projects and continue to work actively with our economic development department and with our planning and zoning, coming up with some solutions similar to what Trumbull did with counting accessory apartments. Trumbull changed modified their zoning laws to include restrictions on the accessory apartments by giving a tax incentive to people who have those. I have one in my house for my mother. And so those were counted, and that helps a lot. So I am working with them and would like to develop that plan. Obviously, we're going to be working with the long-range planning or the strategic planning committee to adopt some of the work that the zoning board, I went to one of their workshops. I don't know if either one of you were able to go, but they were very good, and there was a strong participation rate by the community, which I thought was very helpful. And so those will be some of the changes to update the master plan. But just to be aware that this administration is very engaged in this.
Without a doubt.
And it's unfortunate. I tried like hell as a legislator for 9 years to change the 8-30G statute. Simple, common sense changes like being able to count units that were built before the statute went in place, which would have allowed us another 267 units to be counted toward our goal. But those are simple things that I wasn't able to get done. I was able to get done some things that will help our town a little bit, but it's an unfortunate consequence. The law is well-intended. It just needs to be modified in a way that gives towns the ability to actually reach the goal. It's punitive instead of rewarding, and it doesn't assist towns. It punishes them. So that's where we are, and I know there are a lot of disappointed people in our communities, most specifically the High Street residents, who are going to end up with a 40-unit, monstrosity right next to small single-family homes, and it's not the way we want our town to be developed. We want to have more control over it. But just so you know, I am working, actively working to make sure that we do reach that moratorium, so we do have more control over what's being built in our town.
I just want to add that I agree. It's a very complicated, complex issue. And I know when I was serving on the RTM, I voted in support of a fund that would help us as a town look at the kinds of developments that we wanted to be involved with. And I think the more we have the community engaged from the very beginning of the process, then we can really work together with developers and the community and figure out how we can have the kinds of developments and community that we want. And it is a very complicated issue. So I'm glad that you are invested in it. I don't want to speak broadly and make any grand statement about what has been done or what, because I do think it deserves more time than just an off-the-cuff comment. But it is complicated, and I think we will have to do a lot of work as a community to make sure that we solve a few problems that exist, which is the need for housing, and housing that fits within the character of who we are as a community. So I too look forward to working on this issue. Very complicated.
Yeah, and I thank you for your leadership on it. And I just wanted the people to know that we were cognizant of it and very concerned about it as they are as well. And I thank you for your leadership on it.
Thank you very much.
And I also just want to make the comment that this is my first budget season on the Board of Select People. And I just want to thank you for what's been a really thoughtful, open conversation. And I feel that even though as the minority party member here, that I feel heard and supported. And I just want to say thank you for that, because I think there is some misconception that it's even an us and them, or that it can exist. And I know you're working really hard to make that not the case, and I feel it. So I just wanted to say thank you as the minority party member here.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope that you don't feel like the minority, even though
I don't. No,
you are
I'm
the
saying,
minority.
I mean, even though.
And I'm hoping everyone watching is looking at us as an example of bipartisanship and how two parties can work together for the greater good of the community. And I think we are a shining example.
We all have the letter F next to our name. That's
There
what
we
matters the
go.
most.
F for Fairfield. How about that, Mr. Flynn?
I thought you were going to say for female, and I felt like the minority.
It could be for Flynn, but.
But not for fail.
Well, you are actually the minority, aren't you?
Exactly.
Amen. Done. Mic drop.
Remember that. All righty then. So we are, I have a motion. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, I'll move. I'll move to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Thank you.